Welcome, of course, to the second of our Masterclass sessions, second out of four with Ryan Townsley. For those of you made it last week, we just got amazing feedback on it. It was one of the best webinars I think we've ever had. For those of you who missed it, we do have recordings and materials available for this whole masterclass. So last week was a tale of two bear markets, and we were really talking about, how to talk with clients about retirement spending, overspending, underspending, guardrails, all of the things that kind of Income Lab is known for. And Ryan had some really great case studies on that. So definitely encourage you to check that out. For today, we're shifting gears over to taxes. So next level tax planning to differentiate your firm. This one's also going to be awesome. Feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A rather than the chat. It's much easier to kind of manage all the questions in the chat or in the Q&A. You can upvote the ones you want us to make sure that we try to answer. We'll leave time at the end for questions. This is also available for CE, so make sure you stay on through the end and give us your number so that we can make sure you get credit for the CE. You do have to be on for 50 minutes. And it's not through, 50 minutes past the hour. It's 50 minutes of you actually being logged on. So don't log off. And we'll also have certificates available for people if you want to submit for RICP CE. So I think that may be all of our admin stuff. If anybody remembers what I'm missing, please let me know. But the next two sessions, I'll throw that up again. They have a 2-week gap between them, so we won't be together next week. It'll be 2 weeks from today. We'll be on to the third session, and then 2 weeks after that. So after Thanksgiving, we'll come back for the fourth and final one. So with that said, let's turn it over to Ryan to take us away and talk about differentiating your practice with tax planning.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Just let me know that you can see it. And then, all right, great. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Last week was a lot of fun, and I'm really looking forward to this and the remaining classes. I highly encourage watch them all. They're each individually, I think they give a lot of value, but then if you look at them as a, kind of the sum of the parts, overall, we're going to talk about some great stuff that could just take your practice, and that has taken, speak from first person view, right? Like has taken my practice to a whole nother level, and just like how the implementation of Income Lab and, tax planning and things like that have just made, in general, just a better value for clients, a better experience, a stickier relationship, and a more efficient firm that you can serve your clients better, so higher quality, and serve more of them, which so ultimately just make a more efficient, more profitable firm. So yeah, we're going to dive into it. Just so you know, a lot of this is not directly Income Lab related. I just, as a value add, we just wanted to talk about, the implementation of tax planning. Like if you're not doing tax planning right now, or you're thinking about it, or maybe you just started it, here's some like things that would be great for you to know, and just to, incorporate into, the service to your clients. You're not, if you're not a CPA, I'm not, you're not going to know everything, and you don't need to. You just kind of need to know that things exist, and they're like kind of like trigger thoughts in your mind when you hear them, and then you could go look them up and kind of incorporate them. But for the most part, you can answer 90% of client questions by knowing like 10 things in taxes. So just a little disclaimer, it's not investment tax or financial planning advice. It's like for anybody who doesn't have a license that might be watching. I kept the slide. I'll probably keep it all webinars. This is not a high production value because that's just not me. I did the graphics. They're not great. I definitely spelled stuff wrong, as you say, but the content I think is good. So don't judge me on the appearance of everything, but the content I think is going to add a lot of value. I thought this was funny, just talking about taxes. I don't know anyone that really loves them. And I thought, yes, after we killed the British over taxes, we add all these other taxes back. So, and this is kind of like looking at the history of taxes, and where they come from overall. But that's a conversation for another day. There's two things I can say as a firm owner, and for those that don't know me, there's an intro video and stuff like that. But 6 years ago, I had no idea that starting this firm and it would just turn into what it did. I came from a different industry, had no experience in financial planning, started the business, and now we manage about $130 million for about 80 some families, all nuclear power related, because that's the industry I worked in for a long time. And I can tell you that the implementation of Income Lab and the addition of tax planning to my value add to my clients is by far the most impactful thing that I added. It is a game changer. It completely elevates the experience and the amount that you're able to help clients with. And of added benefit of that is once you add tax planning and you add Income Lab and these things, it's also a fantastic client acquisition tool. So, I don't do a lot of marketing. Most of my client acquisition is word of mouth and organic webinar hosting and things like that. So content, providing content. I don't do paid ads or seminars or anything like that. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those. I mean, being able to show this in a seminar is a fantastic way, but just these two things, like to be able to add more value to your clients, but also to be able to, I'd say in a more cheaper, efficient way, obtain and retain more clients just by adding tax planning in. It's just a game changer. So here's like a list of things that I thought were good to know about taxes. You do not need to memorize the entire IRS code. I don't know it at all. I know enough to know when I hear something, I need to go look it up or incorporate it. And sometimes that's enough. Smart people say don't ever memorize anything you can look up. But these are the things where if I know enough to where if I'm looking at a tax return or I'm talking with a client, I hear certain words, I know enough to where I say, okay, we need to at least dive a little deeper into this so I can help them pay less in taxes. That's our ultimate goal. So overall, it's, capital gains, dividends, net investment income tax, net unrealized appreciation, tax loss harvesting, Social Security taxability, IRMAA for Medicare, asset location, and then bracket management and Roth conversions. And of course, we're going to save the best for last. So, but these are the things I think add the most value and that cover probably 90-ish% of what you'll run into. This is not supposed to be an all-inclusive lesson on these topics. It's really just some, you got to remember there's advisors of varying experience in this webinar. So if you're watching this and you're like, well, there's nothing really original here, just wait till the end because I'm going to show you something really original at the end. But we are going to kind of touch on some topics that you probably already know. But if you're thinking about adding tax planning, I believe that these are the ones that you really need to know. Capital gains, dividends, interest, things like that. Just, in general, knowing why things get taxed differently and how they get taxed differently. Obviously, we know capital gains, less than a year, it's taxed at a long-term capital gain rate, greater than a year. But I'd say educating clients on this so they know it. Most people do know that. They don't, however, I would say most clients do not know how dividends get taxed. So that's pretty interesting, right? Is, your qualified dividends, and you got a little bit of a definition down below. There's a holding period qualification and also has to meet some company and, type qualifications, but you have to hold it for a particular amount of time. But that's actually taxed as a capital gain rate. And then I would say most people don't know that. I'd say the vast majority of people I talk to think that dividend, and not advisors, these are clients, think that dividends are taxed at just your normal income tax rate. So the differentiation between that, I've had clients come in where they have a large amount of non-qualified dividends. That's always a red flag. Like, why do you have so many non-qualified dividends? Knowing that interest and bonds and things like that are taxed as normal income tax rate, obviously in a type of account that it would be taxed. And we're going to talk about that more. And where to find that, just looking at the 1099, looking at the tax return, right? You can find exactly what the breakdown between qualified, non-qualified, everything is. So that's kind of a opportunity, right? As you're looking through the tax return, especially if you're using a program like a Holistic Plan, as you know, my two favorite programs on the planet, and I will say all day, every day, I will die on this hill, Income Lab and Holistic Plan. If I am picking two, that I had to run my firm for the rest of my life with, it would be those two. Those two are the best for client value and the best for client acquisition by far. As you know, capital gains rates, this is, I didn't include everything like the single, the married rate and everything. We'll keep it pretty simple here, but you've got 0, 15, and 20%. And, it is hard, I'd say, to be in the 0% for most people that are going to be a retiree, but it's definitely possible. And it opens up a lot of opportunities. And we're going to talk a lot about that, is creating tax diversity in retirement, how that gives you the ability to control your tax destiny better. We're going to talk about that at the end, and it's going to be great. Here's a little extra something that a lot of clients, and again, a lot of this is like client focus on what they may or may not know, but they don't know about the extra 3.8% tax on investment income, which also known as NIIT, right? So just being aware of that. And, if you're using like a holistic plan, if you're using an income lab, if you're using these different softwares, they do show you those. And I'll show you at the end as we go through an example. I'm going to kind of touch on every single one of these as we go through an actual plan. But if you make over a certain amount of money, you incur capital gains, you're going to pay a little extra on that. So maybe avoiding that, right? And some ways to do that are to sell different lots of stocks rather than to just sell everything. To sell, if you're raising cash and the client's comfortable changing like their asset allocation, you can sell something that has less of a capital gain impact. You can do some tax loss harvesting to offset this, or maybe you could even, I've done this a lot, if a client has a big purchase they want to make, you can split the raise of that cash between 2 years. So if we're talking about, hey, in January we want to buy a new boat or an RV or something, well, let's sell some of these in December and let's sell the rest of them in January. We could literally do it like 2 days apart or a couple days apart and not have to pay this extra 3.8% because we kept our income below these limits. So this is where it gets into how you incorporating yourself into their tax life and really having them call you for, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Not only can you provide the perspective from a retirement planner and how it's going to impact their plan, but also from a tax planner. And obviously there's going to be situations, I have it all the time, where I'm like, I don't know the answer to that when I have to talk to a CPA, and that's perfectly fine, right? We're not necessarily trying to replace the CPA, but we're definitely trying to become more of an authority to help the client in any type of situation that comes up. You want them to call you, right? The more they call you, the more that they see, or that they communicate with you in general, the more they see your value, and the more they see that you really are taking a proactive approach. NUA, net unrealized appreciation. I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time like memorizing the ins and outs of this, but just knowing it existed and hearing like the word, okay, I have a client that has employer stock in their employer plan. That should be enough where you automatically think NUA, and then you can go look it up from there. But NUA is an opportunity for, if someone has employer stock in their employer plan, for them to be able to actually move that stock out of the employer plan in kind over into a brokerage account. They're able to pay normal income tax rate on the basis, but long-term capital gains on the gains. So if you think about that, that would be very effective for somebody who has a very large embedded gain with company stock only inside of their employer plan, and also in a high income tax rate, right? Little caveat, there's a bunch of caveats, so please don't take this as the all-inclusive, but you have to distribute the entire balance of the account in the year, and you have to do this, and you have to do that. There's a whole bunch of different ways, or a whole bunch of different stipulations you have to comply with. But just think, if you have a client with XYZ stock in their employer plan, they've owned it for a very long time. Like I said, this works much better with low cost basis stock. It may even be disadvantageous if they have a high cost basis stock. It really kind of defeats the purpose, right? But if you could imagine, if you were just doing a standard rollover, you would roll over this money into the 401k, and then every dollar of it would be taxed as normal income when it comes out. Where, let's say if you had 1,000 shares of stock, cost basis of $2, so about $2,000 cost basis, the stock's now worth $50 a share. So this is probably really applicable for like tech companies and startups and things like that, right? Clients in the 32% bracket. So essentially they could move all of that stock over, they could pay regular normal income tax rate on $2,000, but then long-term capital gain on $48,000. So, if they're in the higher brackets, like the 32% brackets, this could save them a ton of money, not to mention the extra value that you are not subject to NIIT when you do this. So again, don't memorize all the code that tells you about NUA. I would say if you hear a client say, or if you see that they have employer stock in their 401k or their employer plan, say, hey, we need to do a net unrealized appreciation analysis of this. And even if the analysis comes out that it's not worth doing it, because a lot of times it does if it's a high cost basis or they're in a low bracket, at least you took a look at it. And even looking at something and choosing not to execute it is a value add. They know, the client sees that you're proactive, they see you're looking at it, and they know that you are looking at all of the opportunities to help them save money, even if you don't end up actually implementing one, because it doesn't help save. Tax loss harvesting, everybody knows what this is. So I am going to touch on it very lightly, but then kind of share my thoughts on it and where you have some opportunities, and especially what I see like maybe trend in the industry right now. But it's essentially where you sell securities at a loss to offset gains, right? We know that. So simple example, ETFA is up $500, ETFD is down $300. You sell those, you have a net gain of $200. You only pay taxes on $200. That's great, right? The thing is, though, if you sell both of those, you're now out of the market for at least that portion of the money. So you can replace it with another ETF stock, something like that, but it has to not violate the wash sale rule. And the wash sale rule means that you can't replace it with the same thing or something that's like near, let's say almost identical to it within 30 days. So typically what people do is that they sell an individual stock like an Apple or something, they'll replace it with like a Vanguard Growth ETF or with the S&P 500 and wait 30 days, and then they can decide if they want it back. And that's where it really gets interesting, is that what I do see with most advisors is that they do a lot of their tax loss harvesting at the end of the year, which is great. If you're doing it at all, that's a plus, right? But I think maybe there's an opportunity to do a little more proactively. So for my taxable accounts, I do tend to try to use individual stocks. And I know a lot of people may not like that, or maybe this is not like a plug for using individual stocks. If you have great rebound software, it's really easy. Not trying to make a stock sleeve that beats the market or anything like that. What I'm trying to do is kind of replicate an index, right? So if I have, for example, a large cap growth sleeve, I might just be trying to, replicate the Vanguard Growth VUG, right? So this is my, like the green is like my stock individual sleeve. I'm not trying to show that it beat, because sometimes it beats, sometimes it doesn't. But what I'm trying to do is show that I have like 50 positions in there, and we're getting the same profile as the Vanguard Growth. Now, obviously, you have to have an account size that supports this. You have to have a client that's comfortable with this. So there's caveats, but if you look at the opportunity here, if you only had the VUG in there representing your growth, then there's nothing to, the only thing you can tax loss harvest is like growth against value or growth against bonds, or what you're tax loss harvesting at a very high level, which is fine. That's great. But if you do have, the more positions you have, you're going to get a relatively similar performance as long as you're going for an index style and you're not trying to beat it. But then you have the opportunity that you can take advantage of like wild standard deviations in stocks. So you have, for example, NVIDIA up a ton. You have, a couple of these stocks down anywhere from 20 to 50%. You can sell these at a loss, trim a little bit off of this if you think it's overextended, and essentially maybe get back to a standard NVIDIA position and pay no taxes on it or very little. The great thing about this is it's not forever, right? You don't have to get rid of these stocks forever. You're getting rid of them for 30 days. So if you still like it 30 days later, 31 days, right, then buy back, right? And just replace it with whatever you replaced it with. So if you sell all these at a loss, you replace it with an index fund. Well, then maybe you sell that index fund and replace it with that. Now, you just got to be aware that at that point, you might be generating some short-term gains and things. So you really got to be careful and look at the pros versus cons, how much work this is versus the benefit. I would say higher net worth clients tend to benefit more from this and tend to appreciate it more and have the opportunity. They have account sizes where you can do this kind of stuff. I also think that in general, for tax loss harvesting, we should look at it a little more often. And actually, if your rebound software supports it, like mine, like set triggers for it. So instead of just looking at the end of the year to do some harvesting or something, or on a time-based basis, maybe if any stock drops 10%, especially compared to its peers, then you can take it, get in there and see if there's a tax loss harvest opportunity for you to sell that off, lock in some losses that you can carry forward or offset some gains you already have. And then if you like it, just buy it back in a little over a month later. Social Security taxability. This is one that the vast majority of clients I talk to don't really understand. And, you know, especially when you say things like Social Security is 50% taxable or 85% taxable, they say, I'm taxed 85% on my Social Security. That seems insane. I'm like, no, it does. It means that at particular levels in income, as you can see on the screen, that proportion of money is subject to your normal income tax rate. So, for example, if you're filing joint and you're below $32,000 total income, you won't pay any tax on your Social Security. If you're in between these values, you pay 50%, right? So that means that you take this number and half of that is subject to your normal income tax rate, whatever that is. Just be aware that, and then after that, over 44,000, 85% subjected. So most of our clients, if we're doing retirement planning, if we're using Income Lab, they're going to be subject to the 85% tax. So there's not a ton of value add here. What I've seen with this is, you know, the tax torpedo is one thing, but that really only comes up with people who make on the lower end of income. But the big part of this is making the adjustments around their income once you implement Social Security, because once you start taking Social Security, essentially that's a portion of income, especially if you're doing level income planning where the client does not get a raise when they take Social Security, right? They just take level income, they take Social Security, so they've got a bump up in that income, but then they take less from their investments, so it's a wash. If you're doing that kind of planning, that is going to change their tax profile. And just adjusting their tax withholdings and things like that around that, and you know, that's a huge value add in itself. So just to let you know how we do our tax planning at Town Capital is since the vast majority of our clients are retired and actively taking distributions, we calculate all of their withholdings for them. We do the withholdings. We balance those withholdings around any withholdings and even make adjustments for their Social Security, for if they have a pension, right? So we'll fill out all the forms for them, have them sign them to do all the withholdings for pensions and everything, Social Security. And then we balance our IRA distributions around that. And our goal is to get them, as long as they're okay with this goal, near zero. Plus or minus $200 is a win, right? If they owe 200, if they get 200 back, that's a huge win. But that takes a massive burden off of the client. And I don't see a ton of, for you to be surprised, but there's a lot of firms that don't do that, right? They say you need to contact your CPA and tell us what we need to withhold or whether. So I just think it provides a better experience. It's a very sticky relationship if you're doing all of this, right? So just to know, as far as taxability, just remember what actually counts. Even non-taxable interest counts towards Social Security. So like I said, for most of our clients, they will be in the 85% range for their Social Security taxability. This is a big one, and we're going to talk about this a lot more as we move on, but IRMAA is essentially I wouldn't say a penalty, but it's an added cost to Medicare, right? Medicare is a standard cost for most people, but if you make above a certain amount of money, then you're going to pay a little premium, right? They're going to say, okay, you're, you know, from a needs-based perspective, you can afford to pay a little extra to help out the people that aren't paying as much or aren't making as much. So as you can see, you've got these thresholds where if you make above that threshold, you're going to pay a little more for Medicare. Now, the interesting thing is, right, is what counts towards it. So long-term capital gains, taxable Social Security, it all counts towards it. And it doesn't really matter. Like, there are opportunities maybe to help clients get out of IRMAA if they had like extenuating circumstances. There is a process for that. So for example, if they made a bunch of money the year before, but the next year they're not going to, and you can prove that, you can write a letter. So we've done that for a few clients. We fill out the form, write a letter, help them not have to pay the IRMAA for 2 years, because that's essentially what happens, right? Is it looks back 2 years on your income, and you'll pay IRMAA until that falls off. So it's like a 2-year rolling average of your income, and that's how they determine what your IRMAA is going to be. Now, as you see, it's not an astronomical amount of money. So there are times, and I'm going to show you some times, where it makes sense to deliberately go above IRMAA on purpose, because it's a small amount of money. It's not percentage based on your income. It's a defined amount of money. So if it's somebody has really high income or really high net worth, it may be not even worth, trying to stable or IRMAA if you're trying to achieve other objectives. And we're going to talk about those for sure. This is one of my favorite. It's asset location, right? And asset allocation is what you own. Location is where you own it, right? So if you take a deliberate approach to placing different investments in different types of accounts, you as the advisor can help the client control the taxability of those, right? So this is not an all-inclusive list, and this list actually changes drastically depending on what the client's income tax rate is. But if you look at, there's tax efficient investments and there's non-tax efficient or tax inefficient investments. So any dividend or yield, income, interest, whatever that you receive in a brokerage account is going to be immediately taxable to you at whatever rate's appropriate, whether it's a qualified dividend, normal income tax, whatever. And anything that incurs in an IRA or Roth IRA, et cetera, any type of qualified account is going to be taxable when you pull it out. So if we make the assumption that regardless of what we do with asset location, we're going to have or asset allocation, we're going to have different asset location, meaning let's say we own the same stuff no matter what. We're just going to deliberately place it in different accounts. You can place say, for example, more stocks in your brokerage account and more bonds in your IRA or Roth IRA, if that makes sense for your bracket. So that way you don't immediately incur that normal income. You can put more growth stocks in your brokerage account, so you can do the capital gains where you can put more dividend stocks over in your, now that a lot of that depends on if it's qualified or not, so it might even not even matter. More passive investments maybe go in your brokerage, where maybe more high turnover, high yield, things like that go in your IRA, Roth IRA. So there's a lot of articles about this, and you could model this really easy using, like an Income Lab or an and/or Hillis plan together, especially. But just something to think about is keeping things in different accounts, especially. I've had this come up a lot more, especially as you start working with higher net worth clients, is the taxability of your cash and your money market, right? So if you have Jane, she lives in Maryland, she's in the 22% tax bracket, there's about an 8% state tax. If she owns a money market paying 4.7%, Jane keeps 3.29% after taxes. If she looks at a muni money market fund, which is non-taxable, and it's paying 2.89%, it still makes more sense for Jane to own the taxable money market because her after-tax yield is higher, right? Now take Sarah, who's in the 35% tax bracket and has the exact same options, but due to the higher tax bracket, her after-tax yield of that taxable money market is 2.69%, where the equivalent muni is 2.89%. So it would actually make more sense for I'm sorry, it should say Sarah, for Sarah to pick the muni money market. So small difference between the two, but if you have clients that are really high brackets, really high income, this can make a big difference. And the evaluation of it, like I said, at least shows that you're looking at these things and you're making choices. We could do a whole webinar on this, and actually maybe one day we will. But for business owners, just knowing the general difference and the ability to save money in taxes potentially for an S Corp versus a sole proprietorship versus a C Corp, and then knowing how they can save in different types of accounts, a simple versus a SEP IRA versus a solo 401k, and how they work are just great things to know for business owners, just knowing they exist. And then if you get a business owner client, you can look these things up and do some proactive planning for them. For the S Corp, sole prop, C Corp decision, I definitely would get a CPA involved, but you can surely start and facilitate the conversation. And I like to pre-educate clients on topics and then set up a meeting with me and their CPA, or if it's estate planning, me and their estate planning attorney. That way you're involved in the process, and they associate that you helped them get that done, which you did. All right, so now on to my favorite topic. And my favorite topic is tax bracket management, AKA Roth conversions, things like that. I want to bring back this graphic. Everybody loved it. I didn't make this. A friend of mine made it at another institution. He's great. But this is essentially a great client-facing, simple thing that you can show them how taxes work, because you would be surprised that a lot of dudes don't understand. You know, when they say, well, that's going to bump me into a higher bracket. Well, that's true, but it's only for that next dollar, right? It's not for all your money. And there is some misunderstanding about that. So this is an easy way to put in a value, and you see how it starts to fill different buckets. So what you're trying to teach them is that taxes are progressive, and that they're taxed on the next dollar that spills into the bucket, and then for the remainder of that, and that most times at the end of the year, there's going to be some room left in a bucket. All right. You know, so that's where we bring up the Roth conversion. And this is essentially showing them the taxability. And this was, I was talking about that tax diversity, is creating tax diversity, meaning your IRA is fully taxable. That's why you have this, you know, this diversion over the government. Your Roth is non-taxable, so it goes straight to you. And then you have your brokerage, which is partially taxable. So you have this small line that goes over to the government. And that's because of capital gains and things like that, right? So the ability to create this tax diversity, so you have the choice as the advisor to help the client decide how much from each faucet we're going to turn on, right? So if we used all this faucet to achieve their income, then they'd be whatever tax bracket they're going to be in for that amount of income. Where if we turn this on enough to take advantage of the smaller tax brackets and the standard deduction, don't forget about that. It's a great reason not to convert all your money to Roth, is because you still want to take advantage of the standard deduction and things like in those low brackets. But let's create enough to where we can utilize the standard deduction in the low brackets, and then be able to turn on these other sources to not go into the higher brackets. And that's exactly what we mean when we talk about proactive tax planning, aka bracket management, aka Roth conversions, right? So why do I love them? They save a lot of money in taxes. They build a tax-free legacy for heirs, the added benefit, and they give you, the advisor, the ability to help the client. So let's just take a look at like the impact of that. All right, so if we're looking at the income lab right here, this is just a generic plan. We've got a client who overall has about $1.5 million. They've got a $268,000 joint brokerage account. They've got a $22,000 Roth and a $1.2 million traditional IRA. And they are able to take let's just call it $8,800 a month after taxes. The great thing about Income Lab is you can change this to show exactly what you want it to show, whether it be annual, whether it be net, whether it be in today's dollars, whether it be in future dollars. But this client's going to receive about $117,000 gross, or $106,000 a year after taxes. And this is just assuming they're pulling it straight from their IRA, right? So simple example. So let's go over, take a look at like the taxability of that, right? We've got our interest, our dividends, and then our IRA distributions. And you can see the taxes come out all in all to about $10,200. And it's about, you know, it's really, so Income Lab, the purpose of Income Lab is to do the general tax planning, and then you use a tool like a Holistic Plan or something to do the specifics. So the Income Lab is like, hey, here's our grand plan, and then let's get really granular with it by using the other software, right? But all in all, if we're looking at where's the money coming from, we can say that it's pretty much all coming from the traditional IRA, right? And some of it's going to expenses like taxes and things like that, and we're generating some capital gains, and then the rest is going to the client. The problem with this is they're taking every single dollar right out of this red bucket, right, which is all taxable, right? They're not using any, you know, smart tax distribution strategy. So really, if they're just going to be here. All right. So what if we apply something a little more specific to this, and we say, okay, what if we start to create over the next couple of years, especially if you're young and you're not subject to IRMAA, right? And you're not taking, you're not on Medicare yet, you're not taking Social Security yet, you're retired at 59, 60, something like that, you're not taking RMDs. You have the ability to funnel some of this money over into the Roth in a smart way and under control of the bracket you want to be in. And you can set yourself up to be able to later, like I said, turn on these other faucets and then maintain the client in a lower bracket forever. So by doing that, we run through the tax lab, and the tax lab is awesome. It's going to give us not only the recommended, right? So it's going to say Roth conversions below IRMAA, which is great, right? That's a new feature. And it's going to say, hey, if you want to do Roth conversions, but you don't want your client to go above the IRMAA limit and pay the extra for Medicare, or at least not deliberately, right? We should probably have a conversation with them about that. But what if the client's not yet 65 or 64 or whatever? If they're 60 years old, they're not subject to IRMAA yet. You might not want to use that. So you can actually review all the strategies, see which ones you're looking at. You can pick different ones. So I can pick the IRMAA or the non-IRMAA version of this to see where I want to be. And it tells clients and this, it's not only for clients, this is a fantastic thing that I'm going to show you in the next webinar, how to present this to a prospective client and take your client acquisition rate up tremendously. But just look at the taxes that are saved and the average tax rate, taking it from 11.6 down to 6.9%, saving a couple $100,000 in taxes, improving their legacy, meaning if they do want to leave something to the kids, or even if it's just like what's left is left, then we're going to leave it to them tax-free. You can take a look at the total tax that you're going to pay. You can take a look at the tax brackets, and you can take a look at the break even, right? And this is where you need to educate the client on the pros and cons of Roth conversions. They're fantastic, but if one person in the family, so let's assume it's a married couple, ends up passing away earlier, well, that's even more reason to do even more Roth conversions up front, because unfortunately, when one spouse passes away, there is, I'll call it a bit of a widow penalty, where the remaining spouse after that year has to now file as a single filer. So not only do they lose a portion of Social Security, whether it be in the future or they're drawing now, but they also have to file in a higher tax bracket. So converting to Roth in the early years in retirement makes even more sense for that. But if by chance both spouses passed away earlier than the break-even age, then it would have been better not to do the Roth conversions. But unless you know something specifically about, longevity or something like that, and you think they're going to live even an average lifespan, this makes a lot of sense. Number two is the biggest risk to Roth conversions are if the government decides to materially lower our tax rates for a very long period of time. And that's usually where, like me and the clients would all start laughing, because we know that that's a very low probability, right? The government typically does not lower taxes, especially not for a long duration of time, like a 30, 40-year retirement. So we can look at the break even and see what that looks like. We can explore different strategies and stuff like that. And then when you're ready, once you see a strategy you want, and remember, sometimes Income Lab will recommend like Roth conversions to the 24% or Roth conversions to the 32%. You don't have to choose that, right? You have to find out what the client's comfortable with. And if they're more comfortable with, hey, I like the strategy, but I don't want to go all in, let's keep it to the 22% bracket. That's perfectly fine, right? That's absolutely fine. But what that does is it allows us, again, to systematically over time, we're going to fill this non-taxable source up in the brackets that we can predict. And then at some point, we're going to turn both of these faucets on. So that way we have enough coming from the IRA or the 401k or whatever to take advantage of the low rates, but we're have enough coming from the Roth or other areas to where we can maintain ourselves in a low bracket. That's essentially what this is doing, right? It's a wonderful strategy. So if we go ahead and we take a look at how that changes the landscape, all right, let's go to our tax planning number 2. We've got our Roth conversions in here. And if we take a look at what that looks like, now look at what the flow chart looks like, right? We're actually taking from our brokerage account and living off of that, keeping our taxable income very low to make more room for Roth conversions in the beginning. This is a wonderful strategy for anybody that has cash on the sidelines, brokerage account, anything like that, especially one with not a lot of capital gains. This is a way for them to take advantage. You could actually live on that money in the early years of retirement, have essentially no income, right? If we take a look at this, this is 2025, same income. So we've got the same dividends, everything like that. But now, since we're living on the brokerage account, we have no IRA distributions. We have $10,200 in long-term capital gains, which is kind of like, okay, here's what we estimated we would have to develop. And then that leaves us room to do Roth conversions. Now, deciding if you want to go above IRMAA, that's the dotted line here. Income Lab also delineates that, or if you want to go all the way up to the limit. So for this, we did Roth conversions, right, of about 227,000 because the client was comfortable with that and maintained them in the 22% bracket. It did not, they're not impacted by IRMAA since they're only 60 years old. So it's a beautiful thing. And you can actually show clients how this progresses in Income Lab over time. So you can see 2025, 2026, 2027, and you can, is all these aren't going to be exact numbers because we don't know what's going to happen with the tax code. We can give clients a really good visual as to how the money flows differently when you're doing proactive tax planning than when you're not doing it. You can see Social Security kick in at some point. You can see there's money starting to come from the Roth, so we've turned that other faucet on at this point, right? This is great. So just a wonderful way to be proactive, to what I say, it's a very low risk strategy, considering that only one person in the family, if they are married, needs to live to an average age to make this worth it. And there's a low chance that the government's actually going to lower taxes. So this is what I think is like maybe the only original idea I ever had in my life. And I'm really proud of it. So hopefully you guys love it. But we went over this in webinar 1. So if you haven't watched Masterclass 1, please do. It's going to make a lot more sense. But I like to I created in 2022, and I have right now a down market plan or a bear market plan. And it's a way to empower clients to be comfortable with how do we take advantage, and how do we, we might be scared of down markets, but how do we find some type of silver lining, right? So at these different levels of decline, you can see I have some different actions. Now, the ones I highlighted are expediting or even increasing Roth conversions based on how far the market's down. So let's go back to our example. And let's say that in 2025, this client was going to convert about 200 and some $1,000 to Roth, which is keep it round numbers, right? But typically, I like to do most of it at the end of the year because you never know what's going to happen with a client spending. They may have a health issue. They may need to buy a car. They may need to do this, may need to do that. And if the market is kind of raging along, I say, okay, well, we'll look at this at least in the back half of the year, where if you get a nice 10% pullback in the market, it may be a good idea to say, okay, let's go ahead and do half of that now. We're going to get our money over into the Roth IRA at a discount. Let's go ahead and do half of that. Where if you start to get a 15, a 20% down market, you may do more, or you may even do the whole thing at that, even with the risk of going into a higher bracket. So I actually change the timing and the depth of the Roth conversions I do based on the how, if the market's down and how much. And here's the rationale behind that. Is let's say it's October 2021, you have a stock market that's at an all-time high. You convert $100,000 from your IRA into your Roth IRA. You pay $20,000 in taxes. We'll just keep this very even and simple, right? 80,000 goes into your Roth. So 100 paid 20 in taxes, 80 grand's down your Roth. And then from there, you get some type of average return, whatever the market gives us from then on, right? So we don't know what that's going to be. We can say we know on average over the long term what it's going to be, but short term, midterm, we have no idea. Right? So that's great, right? I mean, you're still if we're long-term investors, then we have a 30-some year runway for retirement. This is a wonderful strategy. But what if it's October 2022 now, and the market's down 22%? Well, and we convert 100,000, same scenario. We pay 20,000 in taxes. Now we have 80,000 in our Roth, but that 80,000 is going in here, meaning that we get 28% upside for the market to come back to even, and then we get an average return after that, right? So that's why I think this math behind this makes a lot of sense, to where if you're going to convert anyway, it makes more sense to expedite those conversions or even increase them the more the market goes down, if you have the room for it. Obviously, if the client's comfortable and all that, you have to have these conversations, right? But just think about that, is maybe even if the market's down a lot, like 30%, maybe at that point we even convert into a higher bracket, right? So maybe at that point we go back and we say, okay, well, the extra 2% tax from 22% bracket to the 24% bracket makes perfect sense if we're going to get an additional 28% of upside because the market's down so much. So you can go back and just change your strategy, and it might just be for that year, right? And you can do a more aggressive Roth conversion the more the market's down. And you may even consider, if someone is subject to IRMAA, converting above that. Because if we're talking about converting hundreds of thousands of dollars to Roth, and let's just say it's 200,000, right? And they're going to pay an extra 2% in tax. That's an extra $4,000 in taxes for doing above. And let's say they're going to get an IRMAA of about $1,000 a year. That means it's going to cost them $5,000. But if we have 200,000 and we're going to get a 28% return to get back to even on that, we're going to make 56,000. So just something to think about, right? Is it worth changing the timing and the depth of the Roth conversion based on how far the market is down when you do get a down market, right? And it's actually a way to make clients a little, I'm not going to say excited, they're never excited when the market's down, but maybe just a little more interested, a little more, intrigued or whatever, just because you're providing, like I said, a silver lining, an opportunity to do something. Let's take advantage of this down market. We're not just going to sit here. We have a plan. It's pre-written, and we're going to execute that plan, and we're actually going to do the same things we say. And I think this adds a ton of value to your firm. It shows clients you're engaged. It shows them you're dynamic. You're not just stuck into here's what we're going to do. It shows them you're not scared, because if you're willing to do Roth conversions and move money over and do all these things, it shows that you believe the market's going to go back up just inherently. And I think it's a wonderful strategy for you and clients. It's great for the relationship. It's great for client acquisition. I go over this with all my prospective clients, and it just really resonates with them. So here's my conclusion. Do tax planning, right? Just do it. If you want to differentiate yourself and not just be an investment manager or a financial planner, I mean, those things are great, but adding tax planning to it really does just include a whole nother level of complexity. Clients love it. It makes the relationship very sticky, right? If I'm not only managing their investments, I'm also calculating their retirement income, but I'm also doing all the withholdings, everything, all the tax calculations for them. If they're going to sell some stock, I'm telling them what they need to pay in capital gains. I'm helping them make the estimated payments, right? All these things just make for a very high service and high retention type of firm. And I really do just love the feedback from clients on what the addition of this, because we didn't always do this, right? The first year, I'd say I purely just did kind of the standard financial planning and, investment management. And we added this in like at the end of year one and really kind of ramped it up year 2, 3, and it's made a huge difference. And I will say this again, my biggest plug is that as a career changer, somebody who does not have a ton of experience in the industry, but is always curious, always willing to learn, I want to be the best. I think that the implementation of Income Lab and Holistic Plan, Income Lab, especially for retirees, there's no substitution. If you watch part 1 of this masterclass, there's no substitution for Income Lab for a retiree. But the addition of these 2 softwares and just proactive tax planning and some of these innovative strategies have made the world of difference, not only in my client, I'd say happiness factor, retention rate, but also new client acquisition. So I'm going to stop rambling. We'll go ahead and open it up for Q&A, and so go ahead and throw your questions out there. We probably already have a ton.
Yeah, we got a ton, and as expected, lots of people love your spreadsheets, so we'll definitely make those available. And I agree, it tells the story so visually and nicely.
No problem.
So many questions here, Ryan. We'll try to hit a few. I think from a practical standpoint, are you doing anything how are you monitoring for given clients, when you hit those points in your down market plan or your bear market plan? Do you have a software that does that, or how do you do it?
Yeah, I kind of use Black Diamond has some things you can kind of incorporate to look at performance from a high level and kind of see where people are at. Another way to do it is to set like triggers in like a general software like a Quanti or something. If you're kind of monitoring that, looking at that, every couple of weeks, once a month or so. So I'm a big fan of Quanti. It's a good program, and it's a really easy way to like track your model's performance and things like that. So yeah, that's how I do it.
Awesome. Couple of questions on kind of earlier retirees, ACA credits getting in the way of Roth conversions and things. Have you run into that, and how do you handle it?
Yeah, it depends. So if you're working with a client that's not worried about that, you don't, say if they are a government retiree, or a lot of the people I work with are retired from a utility, and utilities still, for the most, well, did. They're gone now, but it's grandfathered in that they have some type of like retiree medical benefits that aren't impacted by the ACA limits. So for them, no, it would be, we don't have to really talk about that. For people that are, we have to have, just like the IRMAA conversation, we have to have a deliberate conversation of, is there a math-based benefit to doing these conversions based and versus what you're going to pay in healthcare? It's the same conversation, right? So you can run those quotes on, if you're doing, I don't know all the websites, but Maryland Health Connection, Penny, all that. You can run those income-based quotes to see what the healthcare will cost you. And then you can do the math of the Roth conversion, and you can see if it's worth it. More likely, it's going to be more worth it the further the market's down, because you're getting that, like I said, that upside of tax-free growth. So, but that's a great question. You definitely have to look at that.
Yeah, and I think we did have a webinar which we can link to on the masterclass page as well, with where we talked more about ACA credit planning and things, and showed people how to do that in Income Lab. You can also, I know you were kind of showing very generic, great examples, right? But you can get extremely fine-tuned and, say, hey, I'm not going to do Roth conversions in these 2 years because of ACA credits, but then I'll do them in other years. Somebody was asking, are you converting the entire IRA? You can put a floor on it to say, no, I'm always going to leave some in the IRA, because even though I'll have RMDs, those will probably be taxed at 0 or 10% or something. So a lot of questions along that lines of, there's a lot of subtlety. It sounds like you don't shy away from that kind of thing with clients, because it shows a lot of value. But just so people know, you can do all of that.
In subsequent webinars, the next two master classes, I'm actually going to show you like how I create a plan for a prospective client, and then how we add more details and features as they become closer to becoming a client or become a client. And then how do you customize all those things as you really start to get very specific in your retirement planning. So it is an evolution of the plan. Right?
I know you had several examples in there that I really liked, kind of highlighting how there's some art to this. Like it's not about, run the numbers and just do whatever it says. I mean, even what you said about like, hey, what the tax rates will be, in the future. By the way, there is a way to turn off Tax Cuts and Job Act sunsetting, which, some people might say, given yesterday, maybe you do want to check that out too, right? But who knows? So there's all this art. Given that you work with engineers, like, is that just a natural thing that they understand, or how do you talk them through the process of like, hey, we're going to make good judgment calls here, not necessarily, just go wherever the number looks lowest?
Yeah, so they definitely understand probabilities, and that's kind of where we try to talk with most things. And when I say probability, I mean like, okay, we don't know what's going to happen with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, so let's look at both of these, the sunset and the non-sunset. Let's see what our game plan would be, and let's just say, okay, if we go this route, we're going to execute this way, this route. If not, if we have decisions we're making up front that are going to be, let's say in hindsight, good if it sunsets, but bad if it doesn't, that maybe we hedge our bets a little bit and we do half of this, or we do. So yes, there's always an art to it. With engineers, they do love the math. So if you show them the math, they're good with it. But nuclear engineers in particular are always thinking about what if this doesn't happen, or what if this law changes, or what if, and contingency plans. What do we do if something changes? So that's an important part, and that's part of the art of going over the plan is, this is what the plan looks like if everything goes perfect, but let's also have some backup stuff or some contingencies if it goes maybe not necessarily as planned.
Right. We did have another question into that, the subtleties and the complexities of tax planning. Somebody's mentioned QCDs. Just so people know, if you do have people who are going to be charitably inclined and after 70 and a half, at least the Income Lab software will automatically hold money back from Roth conversions to do the QCDs, because I mean, what's better than tax-free, distributions? So, once you combine all these things, I kind of view it as like you're riding up this graph of like the value of tax planning, right? And bracket management gets you way up, and then QCDs are pretty decent, and then floors on, hey, I'll still pay some RMDs, and there is a point of diminishing returns, but I think viewing them as like, okay, how high up this value curve can we go is an interesting way to go.
Yeah, and then talking about, tax planning and then adding on charitable planning and legacy planning too, like just getting clients to maybe gift an appreciated stock to their favorite charity rather than cash. And a lot don't even know you can do that, right? Like that's huge. You're giving away the capital gains and everybody benefits. So things like that are just huge value adds for clients, and they do remember that you made those recommendations.
Yeah, and I think that your points about how you highlight this to clients, um, I mean, understanding the value that you bring is, I think, one of the big takeaways for me on this. Um, I think that'll. Don't think we have time for any of these. Some of these are a little more complex, but again, we take all these questions and we go through them. The ones that we haven't answered, we will either answer via email, especially if it's something specific to the software, or try to answer in the final session. We might have some time to do kind of a recap, or even we may put together some quick videos just to answer them and include them in that link to all the masterclass materials, which I've put in a couple spots, both in the Q&A and the chat. So please check that out. And
Yeah, the
yeah,
next two classes too are going to be less PowerPoint present, because this was like kind of queuing up everything and more of me just kind of driving through the software, showing you how I use it with prospective clients and how I use it with actual clients, and the variations and plans and things like that we can create. So I'm really looking forward to that. Please tune in for it. You'll love it.
definitely. Well, thank you. This was great. Again, Ryan, really appreciate it. And we will see everyone in 2 weeks. Have a great week, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.